Hello and welcome along, everybody. Before we get going, we're just going to do a quick sound check. So for some of those dialed in, if you could find the chat on the top right-hand side of your screen and just say hello to confirm that you can hear us. Great stuff. Great stuff. And now you've shown that you're awake and interested, we're going to expect some interaction today. Welcome along. Thanks for tuning in today. My name is Phil Bailey from Pagero. I've got around a decade of experience in global trade in terms of supply chain and finance automation. Today, we've teamed up with the clever people over at Yukoi, an intelligent spend management platform. The intelligent part, of course, is AI. Going to introduce my co-presenter today, Georgie Colbin. Georgie, tell us a little bit about yourself and Yukoi.
Thank you, Phil. Hi there, Georgie Colbin from Yokoi. Have been with Yokoi for about 3 years now. Previously worked in finance as finance analyst at a venture capital and real estate investment bureau. Yokoi, we're an AI-driven global spend management platform that works together with Pagero. And our vision is true zero-touch spend management, making sure that you and your team really focus on what matters in finance. And I'm really looking forward to today's webinar.
Thank you, Georgie. It's a pleasure to have you alongside me today. Let's hope we can find that perfect balance of insight and interest for our audience today. Together, we're going to be exploring EU and global e-invoicing challenges, including actually future-proofing financial processes through Yukoi's AI-powered automation. Before we get going, we're just going to do a quick poll to ask who's in the room. If you'll see that pop up, if you select who you are and where you're from, it'd be good for us to be able to then focus and hopefully drive some interest in your direction. We'll give that a few seconds as people are still clicking buttons. Okay, let's share those results. It looks like we've got a good healthy mix of professionals in the room today, as we would expect. At least one in every category, but I think we're quite heavily weighted towards IT and finance, and this is not surprising given the topic today. Okay, so let's move on and let's move into the presentation. We're going to start by looking from a perspective of global compliance, what we all do as organizations and the impact that's being had upon business operations, whether you're a small single market business or a cross-border global organization. And then we're going to look at how those challenges can be looked at differently and how effective technology strategy could look to go beyond regulatory compliance and into transformation and competitiveness. From a very high level, I would say that we are all in the business of trade, moving goods and services from A to B, either doing it, enabling it, supporting it, advising upon it. This is the ecosystem that every organization exists within. There's both a physical flow of goods and services and other commodities, either locally or globally. There's also a supporting digital flow of information. And that area there, the digital flow of information, and even more micro, the order to cash and purchase to pay flows within an organization. That is actually the lifeblood of an organization, knowing what's being ordered, what you're ordering, what money's coming via the invoices and the payment cycles. That's what we're going to cover today. And in particular, the e-invoicing flows. This is a really interesting area because it's an area that used to be disrupted by big buyers looking to facilitate automation projects. It used to be straight through processing. and solely looking at the buyer's perspective of looking to get good quality data within their own systems. The shift that's happening in the market is certainly a paradigm shift because we're seeing disruption happening from a different angle. We're seeing government driven change, are innovating and disrupt this traditional cycle. Big bulky system, market economy, or every economy. If you are an operator in that market, if you're in the business of trade, then you now have to do something differently. Either today you're already doing it, or you will be doing it. And that's simply because every government on the planet, or almost every government on the planet, is changing the way in which they look at VAT and tax, and how invoicing, as an example, is the key to unlocking effective digital flow of information from both a regulatory perspective, collecting VAT that legally needs to be collected in a more efficient and modern way, but also from a digitization of economy perspective. So from a regulatory perspective, the world's busy with a plethora of change. And this change really does impact every business in almost every market. So I would say there's a huge trend that started around a decade ago where governments are instilling mandated change requirements. You must e-invoice differently. So if that invoice is digital, it means that we can look at the tax collected information. We can also enable a better digital flow of goods. That's happened. We're seeing those implemented mandates evolve and change and re-implementations happen. We're seeing governments that previously had not started a program of government mandated e-invoicing or tax reporting change start to consult and look at the marketplace, what's going on. Um, the benefit of this is, of course, this timeline goes back many, many years, and it also goes forward many years. Those governments that are looking to put something in place for the first time or change maybe their own models and ecosystems, they can look at what's happened over the last decade, what's worked, what's happened. Here is that, and that change is quite daunting for organizations because on top of that busyness, we saw that map of changes across a time scale, sometimes the same country appearing multiple times, perhaps because they're starting to roll out across phases, company size, sectors, and so on, to try and smooth the implementation of enforced digitization in the market. On top of that busyness, the world's pretty complicated too. Different models. That's how a government or government authorities choose it appropriate to implement such change within their own jurisdiction. Different formats and content rules. There's regulatory overlaps in terms of data digitization and the flow of this important fiscal information in the invoice, right? So if we look at that map of countries that are doing something, that's different in every country we serve. There might be a different model. We might have to find a technology provider in one market. We might have to connect to a central government hub in another. In other cases, what we call clearance is where a government may force the flow of e-invoice information to review, to validate and authorize that before that can be transmitted to the business party or the trading party for payment. And others are more of a traditional, what we'll call post-audit model. The details of this is not for today. The intention today isn't to do a deep dive, but I think it's really important to take a helicopter view and understand that the world's both busy. There's stuff going on in every jurisdiction, and that stuff really equates to having to look at the way that we, as an organization that serves a market, whether we're selling goods and services locally or we're doing it cross-border globally, we have to do something a little bit different in terms of the way we look at how we collect and report tax information to governments in terms of tax reporting and VAT. And we have to do something in terms of the way that we exchange documents with our trading communities, and they are invoices, and in some cases a much deeper level, including orders and such. So this plethora of change, this plethora of complicated change, is really daunting. Um, so help, I think, is what we hear quite a lot from organizations understanding and learning. Hey, my day job is my day job, exchanging goods and services. Because we're in the business of trade, this stuff is hard. Why is it so complicated? Well, the root cause for that is to plug the tax gap globally for governments, the tax that's legally collectible, to ensure that it's got a higher likelihood of being collected, but also to drive value and digitization and to remove friction from trade within markets, right? And I think there's two really good examples of this. If we look at established regions with long-standing digital mandates, such as many jurisdictions in Latin America, we can see that they are now using data on a governmental level to make the lives of tax-paying businesses better in terms of pre-populated returns, using that supply chain visibility for resilience to build resilience against black swan events. Now, these are where there's a a global event that disrupts supply chains, such as a pandemic, such as trade barriers and such. Understanding where the goods and services are and how those flows can be directed is much more effective when those flows are digital and not analog. So that's a really, really good example of where mandates are being used to drive better economic forecasting and resilience. In another part of the world, we see regions such as Australia and New Zealand, where I think it's a really great example of where, um, so for example, businesses that supply central government, if they e-invoice in a digital way using predetermined standard formats such as PEPAL, they will receive committed reduced payment terms. This drives availability of cash, and it really supports the small, growing, and even larger organizations operating in that market, which is, I think, a really good example of a government actively using enforced digitization as a tool to remove friction from trade. So the world's complicated, and the world's busy. That impact, all that change, has a really big impact on all of us, all businesses operating within a market or a region. Again, as I've mentioned, whether you're single market, local businesses, but especially if you're operating cross borders and internationally. And the question that we should all ask ourselves is, are your existing set of tools geared up for these challenges, these requirements, and this need for change? And that goes across IT, that goes across finance, but it actually spans across whole of business operations for many, many organizations, because it leaves a choice, and that choice is quite daunting. Hey, as an example, if you're operating in 10, 20, or even 120 jurisdictions, there may be a chance that you're going to get 10, 20, 120 different models of e-invoicing and tax reporting requirements. That's quite daunting. Do you build something yourself? Do you partner with global vendors? How does that impact other parts of your finance operations? Hey, we've got this technology provider for e-invoicing. How does that affect our AP flows? Um, how does that impact our business operations, and so on and so forth? So just thinking about it is the first step to understanding how you build an effective strategy to address these challenges. And just as a wider example as well, VIDA is an EU-led initiative. It's a directive that intends to cut across some of this jurisdictional complexity, and really have an endeavor to instill some harmonization. VIDA is VAT in a digital age, and it's essentially a series of far-reaching measures which aim to reduce the VAT gap, and make the European-wide VAT system more efficient for business. It looks at things like e-invoicing and digital reporting, looking at how a single VAT return would be effective across the whole of the EU community. But it also looks at a modern approach to the platform economy. So what I wanted to do on a very high level is take some of those challenges that we looked at just now and just offer some ingredients for success based on the trends we're seeing with some of the organizations we're working with here at Pagero as that global e-exchange network of these e-invoices globally, whether it's a PEPL requirement towards central government in Australia and New Zealand, or whether it's really established incumbent clearance and e-document requirements in Latin America and wherever else in the world. What we see is three main ingredients that lead to not just success in terms of reaching compliance. That's the bare minimum we all have to, as organizations, to be good corporate global citizens in order to avoid the fines and penalties and the reputational impacts that come with non-compliance. But using it as a springboard to success, to use enforced change as what I would say free of charge resource. You have to do something. You have to adopt some kind of technological change to address your finance flows in terms of e-invoicing and your VAT treatment in terms of how you collect and report that VAT information. How can you use that as a springboard to transform your AP flows, to transform your business operations? Well, firstly, I would say the power of people, using the people within your organization, whether they're operational, whether they're leadership, whether they are external advisors. um, they know your business in and out. They know where the bottlenecks are, they know where the pain points are, but they also know what good would look like. That will enable you to analyze your own capabilities and then to understand what a centralized strategy would look like. Whether it's centrally deployed, it must be what I think what you need to do is have centralized line of sight into how you're operating against or in the face of these challenges globally, and then you can strategically roll out your CTC, as you call it, those continuous transaction controls, which is an umbrella term for these e-invoice and tax reporting regulations. That's a fast high-level overview of the global ecosystem in terms of government-driven change and regulatory requirements facing every organization or almost every organization on the planet. To take that one step further beyond that map and beyond VIDA within the European Union, we're seeing increased evidence globally that governments are looking at things like VIDA and running a pilot. How do we do this? Those 5 models that we looked at previously, which is the most effective way to drive organizations to be able to achieve compliance in the most effective way while giving the outcomes of digital economies and better reported tax information. So we're seeing organizations across Europe and the rest of the world participate in a PEPL and VIDA pilot. PEPL is a way to transact information in a standardized way. VIDA in the last few weeks reached first stage approval, which is really, really successful. It means the details have been broadly agreed, and the next step is formal approval. The US and the EU are in conversations around this topic of cross-continental e-invoicing. And in the last week, the UK government, the HMRC, and the Department for Business and Trade have launched a joint consultation to understand what a invoice mandate would look like across the entire of the UK. So stuff's going on, and it's really exciting. And the daunting stuff is where technology advisors and platforms such as Pagero and Yokoi can really look to address the bigger picture and understand how that can be used as a springboard to value. So mentioning Yokoi, I think it would be a really good time to introduce Georgie and understand how Yokoi's proposition um, can seek to address some of these concerns and other wider transformational functionality to organizations that are listening in today.
Right. Thank you, Phil. Really appreciate the complete overview you provided of what finance, but also IT professionals can expect in the world of mandates, of data. And let's face it, finance departments, but also IT are under immense pressure. Regulations are multiplying, compliance is becoming more complex, tax compliance as well. Yet the teams are expected to do more with fewer people. And the question is how? But the fact is that it's not only a people problem, it's also a technology problem, as Phil said in the beginning. And at Yokoi, we believe that compliance and financial automation should go hand in hand. And we're not just improving efficiency, we're really transforming of how finance departments operate. And after all, efficiency and automation is not really possible if your input data isn't compliant or correct. However, the reality is that most companies are still stuck in the outdated and manual processes. And when managing change correctly, several aspects of the process do need to be reviewed. So today we're covering four. We go to the next slide. But before we dive into that, one back, Phil. Before we dive into that, did you know that 84% of the operational accounts payable work of invoicing is still manual? And even in expense management, what we also cover, 51% of the processes remain stuck in repetitive, error-prone workflows without processing, without being approved. And the consequences, as I said, slow approvals, frustrated employees, but also worried suppliers, and in essence, missed opportunities. Now, adding to that, add compliance mandates to that. Countries around the world are introducing e-invoicing, digital reporting requirements. Governments are enforcing stricter tax regulations, demanding real-time data exchange, and really pushing companies to modernize, even though sometimes that isn't as easy. And if you're still relying on outdated systems, you're not just falling behind, but you're exposing the business to risk. And that's where AI-driven automation in finance comes in. So at Yokoi, we eliminate manual work by automating 80 to 95% of the finance processes. We're a young company. We were founded 6 years ago by finance and technology professionals. And this has grown to a point that we're now over 30 people in the AI lab only working on the intelligence model to really drive compliance, drive efficiency. And of course, AI is a buzzword. It's being used in the news a lot, but our AI doesn't just extract data from invoices. That's not the point. It understands data. So it really learns from your behavior, acts based on context, and then applies intelligence, compliance rules, and then seamlessly integrates to your existing ERP, HR, or tax ecosystems. So the goal, and imagine an AP process that is actually completely exception based, where only the most complex cases require human intervention. To name an example, one of our clients was a fast growing retail business. They used to check every single invoice and expense manually, and they had because of their growth, they had a team of over 10 students doing their AP work. And the moment they started with Yokoi, they transitioned to a fully automated exception-based system, cutting the processing time while improving the accuracy of data. And this way they could consolidate from 10 to 2 FTE doing AP and scale effectively. So let's go over the four aspects of this process, starting off with document processing. Of course, different suppliers and different types of documents, layouts, formats, some that make sense to you, but also some that would make less sense to your team. So therefore, a high OCR extraction is just not enough. OCR is only scanning in essence. So what about the actual context and understanding the use of the data? That's where AI comes in. So AI ensures that the data is really understood and structured. So even though your data on the invoice or document that you're receiving is not on the place where you expect it to be, AI understands it. Combine that with the need for data granularity and accuracy, this is where the difference is made. So this also ensures that the data quality for archiving and for audit is really enhanced. Going to our second point, being workflow review. So to ensure your AP and AR invoices are processed correctly by the right people, you need something that is flexible and agile to ensure that you can create your own way of working. Basically going from workarounds to your preferred workflow. It is crucial that workflow design does not limit your team and approval processes. Take this example. Why would you triple check an invoice that is extracted and exactly the same every single month and is checked by multiple approvers when you can basically let AI do the checking for you and which is based on your previous behavior. And if, of course, it deviates from certain behavior, then you would like to have the approvers check it again. But if that's not the case, you can basically set it to auto approve or have a single approver for it. This makes it possible to also focus more on outliers and duplicates, maybe fraudulent cases, but the overall goal is really exception-based work. Apart from the operational work reduction, this enhances the value-adding feeling of contributing for finance professionals, and it makes work more fun, in essence. And overall, it increases the organizational success altogether. Right. Going to our third topic, being governance and risk. Automation doesn't stop at efficiency. It's about compliance at scale and actually global scale. Governments are imposing new mandates at unprecedented pace, and with Yokoi, compliance isn't a burden, it's built into the system. The technology incorporates internal policies from your company or your specific entity or your department to country-specific regulations, ensuring that every transaction, document approval, VAT readout meets the regulatory requirements. So whether you specifically mean VAT regulations in Europe or mandates in specific countries, or the prevention of potential fraud on the documents you process, the AI ensures that you can enhance this compliance now, but also in the future, because it understands the behavior you're acting upon right now. Lastly, ecosystem setup and integrations. We, of course, know that no business operates in isolation. That's why we've built seamless integrations with major global ERP systems like SAP, Microsoft systems, the Oracle systems. But we also we are open for the open API structure that ensures that you can integrate Yokoi basically for input and output to systems you already have. Um, and we all also know that your accounting system is the single source of truth. And we ensure that we check the data for you and only output the correct data to the ERP, making it less cluttered and truly being a single source of truth. This is more than just finance automation. This is the future of spend management, where you don't just automate finance, but you really empower your business to thrive in a digital first world. With that, handing back to you, Phil.
Thank you, Georgie. I think this is really, really interesting. I picked up a couple of buzzwords from what you said. Making work more fun. I think everybody would thrive in that environment. And also understanding. It's not just about simple AI extracting information. It's to drive understanding. And I think understanding is where organizations can get closer to decision-making support rather than just automating menial tasks. And I think this certainly looks really interesting, especially in the context of the compliance and the regulatory environment where we as organizations are having to do something differently, having something to smooth and lubricate that journey to make business operations more fun and to give us better understanding of our own data is really, really exciting. What we wanted to do is cover a little bit about what that looks like. We've heard a little bit about the regulatory landscape, how technology like the Pagero Global e-document network could facilitate the compliance and connectivity and reach to government-driven mandates globally, and how the good people over at Yokoi um, are supporting organizations with really exciting AI-driven AP functionality. If we look at an example within Germany, who are rolling out an e-invoicing mandate, I think Germany is a good example just to spend a couple of moments on, for the reason that Germany is a very, very established market with a heritage of digital document flows, born out of manufacturing and construction industries. EDI flow of in German established for many, many years, but in a bit of a maverick way. Big buyers looking to automate their flows or suppliers looking to consolidate their flows have agreed the best way to build that spider web of connectivity. Different ways, different methods, different models, different formats, and different rules and requirements. Sounds similar to as we discussed earlier on a country level. So what Germany has done, and this is an evolving, an evolution, I guess, of what the mandate will look like in terms of timings, but enforcing truly structured and standardized flow of information, looking at the traditional non-digital flows. If we look on the left-hand side here in the timeline, is enabling businesses to prepare and facilitate their journey to regulatory compliance and enable them the time to understand how they could use that as a springboard to looking at wider operational and finance efficiencies, as we've been talking about and as Georgie just explained. So, and allowing the continued flow of offline analog information, um, moving it and transitioning it from standard to allowed, and then eventually tethering that down to a non-allowed communication method. And the same as if we look on the right-hand side of this, looking at the more traditional data interchange flows and how that spider web of unstructured or unstandardized information, when we look at the market as a whole, will transition from allowed to not allowed, with a heavy focus on true e-invoicing using what's called a European norm or known standard ways of communicating and known standard formats, meaning that organizations can either directly develop capability by partnering with a technology provider that's best for them, their price, their growth, their philosophy, and knowing that connectivity and reach will be achieved instead of having to lock in based on very complicated, specific traditional EDI ways of working. So Germany is a really good example of how you take a established, complicated market and enable business to smooth and transition into a modern, standardized way. Then look at spoiler, a poll's coming after this slide, but this is really bringing together what we've spoken about today. So if we start from right to left, a buying organization has two major challenges, as we've discussed today. There's a plethora of regulatory forced change in the markets that we all serve that we're going to have to address. So if I'm a buyer, my suppliers are having to do something differently and in the way they send and transmit and approve invoices and tax information. And I, as a buyer, am having to do something differently in the way that I receive information in terms of invoices, and may have to report that in transit or after the fact. How do I marry that with my need to be as efficient as possible? How do I marry that with my ambition to be as future ready and competitive as possible? Because I want modern, best of breed, cloud based technology that's going to help me meet my future efficiency, AI-driven, and competitiveness needs? Well, connect once to the partnership. So, for example, you're connected here once to Yokoi with one connection, one relationship, one single exchange of format, your core ERP or otherwise. And then Yokoi and Pagero take care of that exchange of information. You can then focus on your spend management, your understanding of your own financial information, and the way in which that's received into your organization for you to then overlay that future-proof AI-driven modern management of your spend and e-invoice financial information is via the global Pagero network. So that complexity is handled via the single global relationship. We handle whether it's a small local provider that's using a portal to send their one invoice a week or a month, or whether you have suppliers that are also operating globally and they've got big technology providers, or even if it's a market where there's this forced government clearance model, as we spoke about earlier. However, governments move in the ebbs and flows of government driven change, whichever method those invoices come in, um, they come into you via a single connection, via a single format, via a single way of working. So you have trust and scale in your own processes, so you can focus on those added value modern processes and driving your strategy forward. And that any 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 methodology into the ecosystem really is powerful. And I think this is a really good example of two technologies combined, driving both global trust and certainty. Hey, regardless of which market I'm serving, um, I can receive compliant information in the right regulatory way, but I can now also use that information seamlessly to drive value into my own organization and my own flows. And so on that, we wanted to pop up another poll at the end of today's session before we ask some or open the floor to some questions. I've seen some come in, so we will firstly show a poll. If you could look at some options and understand whether you would like to engage further to understand maybe the challenges on your organization, maybe even the wider challenges, not just on your organization, but what's coming up in the markets you're serving. Could we get some regulatory insights? Or how could this AI-driven, clever technology help me understand a business like mine? And also then what we'll do here is we'll introduce my colleague, Chris Ghost, who will go through the chat and understand what questions have been asked today, and we'll see if we can get to them for you. Chris.
Yes, hello there, gents. Just going to finish this poll up for everyone, and then we'll get on to the questions. Definitely covered some really interesting points today. Partnership with Yokoi, obviously adding that AI capability, the power of the Pagero network, and achieving as close to that full automation as possible. Definitely exciting. I can see we've had a few questions. We'll just finish this poll up, and we'll move on. So let me see here. First of all, I think this one's for you, Georgie. How long would it take to get to the 95% automation that you mentioned?
Yeah, it is a good question, and we get that asked a lot because 95% sounds ideal. I wouldn't say there's a specific time to get there because AI continuously learns from your behavior. So first, you need to ensure that your data is correctly read out, gradually adapt to the way of working. But generally, what we see is that you start off with an automation rate or an efficiency rate increase of about 40 to 50%. So that's already your operational work reduction. And then you steadily increase the automation rate to 95% within typically weeks, maybe months, depending on the complexity. But that is a typical timeline.
Awesome, thank you very much. Next question, I think this is also for you, Georgie. How can my P2P system accommodate global entity-specific settings, including different approvals and document types?
Yeah, also a good question. I also saw a question in the chat that was related to this, about integration with different systems. Um, So with systems like Yoko and Pagero, you need something that is flexible. You need something that is cross-entity based. You need settings that are specific to your entity, your organization in a specific country. Same goes for approvals, document management, um, and you need a standardized way of working, yet staying flexible to adapt to new situations. And something that's a true global P2P solution should adapt to um, your structure instead of having limitations. So you need to adapt around the limitations, basically.
Brilliant. We are just coming up to the end of our scheduled time, but I think there's a couple more here we can cover. So someone's asking about where does cross-border come into the picture? I think, Phil, you can expand upon this one.
Yeah, sure. I think cross-border is really interesting. There's two things. Vida in general is concerned with cross-border transactions across the community. So really, the legislation will come that you can be registered from a VAT perspective in one member state, but you will need to understand how to or be required to report and transact across the community. Um, when we look globally, we see lots of domestic mandates that start with, hey, um, if you're a locally registered VAT organization, this only impacts you. Naturally, they evolve to include organizations that are serving that market from outside. So it's always worth knowing, is this a mandate that's only for B2G for governments? Is it just for B2B? Is it just for organizations operating locally? Or actually, if I'm serving that market from a different jurisdiction, does it affect me today, or what will that look like for the future? The answer is it will almost certainly come into play that all flows will be mandated. Quite often they start with domestic and expand from that point, and we see many cross-border mandates in play today already.
Great. I think one last one. There's a. I'm gonna summarize here, but there's a question here around why we need different e-invoicing providers, and why don't you just connect straight to the government? So maybe expand a little bit on that if you can, guys.
Um, I can take that um, from a reach and a connectivity point of view. The models really vary in every market, right? So um, from one point of view, government A might say, hey, we want to digitize this market. We're going to instill a framework like, for example, PEPL, which is both a way of working between service providers and a format. So then by enforcing that, it means that businesses are free to go and select a service provider that is, let's say, PEPL capable in that market, and then they can choose that provider based on their own commercial requirements, price, capability, willingness, added value-added features, partnership, reach, and so on. And that just then works much closer to a mobile phone network. You pick your brand of mobile phone and the network. You're not concerned with who you're phoning, what phone they have, and what network they're on. But other jurisdictions have hubs where you need a specific way of connecting, a specific format. But what's true is across every mandate that we've seen is there's between 9 and 200 changes every single year on the requirements. So any organization is able to connect and establish connectivity on day one, but remaining compliant requires resource. And I think if you're then operating across many jurisdictions, it's significant resource. So technology service providers like Pagero that enables the reach, the connectivity to government hubs, frameworks like PEPL, and EDI, connections to procurement platforms like Ariba, like Coupa, and so on, means that that flow of documents can happen seamlessly into organizations or their chosen AI-driven workflow tools like Yokoi. And I think that modern partnership approach really enables the best and fastest route to not just compliance and automation on day one, but also future proofability.
Perfect. All right. Well, I think that's exactly on time. So yeah, we'll round it out there, I think.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everybody who dialed in today. We look forward to interacting with you some more.
Thank you very much, everyone.